Social media, it controls our lives, but yet so many people barely understand it. 64% of Americans view it as negative, but can't stop using it. We are more connected than ever, but also lonelier than ever. Why is this? Well, in this video, I'm going to hopefully easily and digestibly break down some fascinating scientific literature put out by McGill University, which goes into the social neuroscience and evolutionary anthropology surrounding this surface level topic. Hint, hint, it is not surface level at all, but rather an evolutionary adaptation that proves that we're not even necessarily addicted to our phones at all, but rather something far more primal that dates back hundreds of thousands of years, and also how to stop it using science-backed evidence. This video will be broken down into 8 parts that will continuously build on each other as the video goes on. So the question begins with, why do we do it and why can't we stop? It's no secret and extensively studied that excessive social media use is directly correlated with depression, materialism, social anxiety, and so many other problems. So the simple answer is because we're highly socially evolved creatures. Many people think of excessive technology usage as antisocial, but actually, it's the complete opposite. In quotes, the paper stated, "Mobile technology addiction is driven by the human urge to connect with people, and the related necessity to be seen, heard, thought about, guided, and monitored by others that reaches deep into our social brains and far in our evolutionary past." In addition to that, humans have an innate drive to function optimally in any environment they're in. So humans are naturally news-seeking creatures and actually desire large amounts of culturally relevant information from others. This keeps us socially ingrained in our communities and also kept us alive. For instance, if someone got killed by a tiger and no one ever said anything about it, more people will get eaten by a tiger. So naturally, through evolution, we learn to communicate with each other and solve problems and also identify problems. So where exactly do smartphones come into play with this? The most crucial point of this whole paper is that humans are simply pro-social creatures. It's not necessarily new technologies or a societal shift that fuel our addictions, but rather a deep need for connection and sociality that phones simply, easily, and rapidly deliver. Think of it this way. A great example they used in the article was with advancements in kitchenware. It's not the new highly efficient stoves, let's say, that make people obese. It's the deep-seated desire to eat fatty and sugary foods. And these more efficient products just make our deep-seated cravings easier to obtain. But that's not saying that these companies don't take advantage of these deep-seated desires. That's something we'll get into in just a minute. And this point was actually proved in this study. In quotes, "Current findings in evolutionary psychology and social neuroscience indicate that women are on average more proficient at social cognition and tend to display more pro-social behavior than men. So therefore, women should show higher rates of addiction when it comes to phone use than men, right?" Well, yes. Thompson and Lougheed proved this in 2012 and Van Dusen in 2015. Sorry if I butchered any of those names. They claimed, and I quote, "According to our hypothesis, the pro-social nature of female smartphone use would render females more susceptible to addiction. Recent estimates confirm this view. Females are more likely to develop addictive smartphone behaviors, experience more anxiety if they cannot use their smartphones, and feel less in control over checking their phones." So this proves that it's the pro-social nature of humans that drive our addiction, and phones are just a sly weapon that take advantage of this. This is all great, but how do our brains actually work in correlation to this? And what actually goes on inside our brains? First, we must understand how the mental part of our mind works. The paper brings up mind wandering. Think of this as daydreaming or just not completely conscious thought. Research shows that a very large part of our, in quotes, Spontaneous mental lives are devoted to rehearsing social scenarios. After reading this paper, throughout the day, I try to be more conscious of my daydreaming thoughts. And I realized that every single one of them was about a social scenario that has happened or might happen. After watching this video, try to be conscious of your own daydreaming thoughts, and you'll realize that probably like 95% of them involve a social situation. We all know this too well when we're in the shower. We look back at that social scenario, and while we're showering, we formulate the most amazing way we could have said it. Nevertheless, there's an extremely interesting phenomena that actually happens with this directly correlated to smartphones, which we'll get to a bit later in this video. But to put it in perspective, about half the time we're awake, we're actually in these states. Research shows that almost all but a small fraction of daydreaming is spent in social scenarios. In fact, and I quote, "Mind wandering and social cognition rely on shared neural activation, whereby the neural activity that occurs during daydreaming significantly overlaps with that of core social processes like mentalizing and perspective taking, the very processes that enable an individual to socially flourish." Paul Andrews, a professor of psychology and neuroscience at McMaster University, even says that depression might have specific social advantages that help keep social problems in mental focus. This actually strengthens the point before of women being more pro-social on average than men, because women actually experience higher rates of depression. So all in all, there is very strong evidence suggesting that humans are almost always thinking about other people or through other people. So how does this tie into our outside lives and social media? A fascinating quote from the paper that really surprised me was, "Over the course of normal cognitive and social development, humans learn to see the world through the perspective of other people and intuitively imagine context-relevant agents, usually imbued with prestige, to guide them in their actions. From context to context and moment to moment, we outsource a large part of our thinking, feelings, and decision-making to sometimes explicit, most often implicit scenarios of the what would so-and-so think, feel, or expect me to do variety." So if I can put this bluntly, your thoughts aren't even really your own thoughts. You learn to frame your thinking based on people around you, people that you might have looked up to, people that you aspire to be like, people that you watch on television, etc. This goes directly into something called the hypernatural monitoring hypothesis. I slowed it down because I could not get that part right. This is a hypothesis that claims that we fashioned our gods and spirits to better flesh out the imaginary agents that guide our ordinary cognition, consciousness, action, and moral attitudes. And this would make sense. The paper tied it to this because it scratches our innate need to watch and monitor others. So to the whole point of this video, how do social media companies know this and take direct advantage of it? And how do they specifically modulate our brains into addiction? And what is the neuroscience behind it? Well, this is exactly how they do it and what goes on in your brain. The tech giants we have today are some of the wealthiest companies the world has ever seen. And if you don't think they extensively study human evolution and nature and take direct advantage of it, you're gonna be in for a surprise. It all starts with something called the basal ganglia. A paper put out by Cold Spring Harbor Perspectives on Medicine sums up the basal ganglia as a group of subcortical nuclei responsible primarily for motor control, as well as other roles such as motor learning, executive functions and behaviors, and emotions. So for the sake of this video, just specifically remember the learning and behavior part. No matter if the social interaction is over the phone or not, this activates dopaminergic reward circuits in the basal ganglia. It's also really important to note that this is the same circuitry that takes place with pretty much every other addiction. The basal ganglia learns to attribute two stimuli together. This is the building block for learning. The two stimuli are broken down into two parts: the anticipation of the reward and the actual evaluation of the reward. For instance, the reason why you clicked on this video was because of an anticipation of a reward, whether that be knowledge, insight, entertainment, etc. Now, after you watch this video, you'll subconsciously evaluate if that reward was worth it. If you love this video, you're more likely to come back because your brain has learned to attribute my videos with, to put it very simply, a good feeling. And this just makes you more likely to do it again. And I'm sure you can guess, your phone is the same exact way. You hear that famous text message ding. That's the anticipation. You look at your phone and it's the person you have a crush on. And the evaluation is you feel great, you feel loved, you feel seen. Your brain will start associating that sound with that desired feeling. And I'm sure you can now start seeing how these compulsive loops start. But this starts to become even more addictive when something called intermittent reinforcement or variable ratio schedules comes into play. But quickly, I want to make something more clear. Dopamine will raise above baseline during the cue and then fall back down to baseline during the reward. So to make this point more clear, the text message ding is what surges dopamine. Think of dopamine as the want neurotransmitter. You hear the text message ding and now you want to check your phone. You want to see who it is. And then, like I said before, as you're receiving the reward, dopamine will fall back down to baseline. That is, if your expectations were met. If they weren't met, it goes the other way, which we'll go into more depth. But back to variable reinforcement. The paper sums this up perfectly, and I quote, "Neuroscientists have identified that a cue triggering a behavior that yields a reward 50% of the time is by far the most anxiety-inducing of delivery schedules. A reward delivered 75% of the time, for example, can be reliably expected to deliver most of the time. A cue signaling a reward that delivers 25% of the time can similarly be expected not to deliver most of the time. Such high predictability schedules, when the brain can reliably predict what is going to happen, typically trigger low arousal. At a 50% delivery rate, a reward schedule is still predictable enough to be enticing, but unpredictable enough to be anxiety-inducing. Sounds a bit like something we're pretty familiar with, right? But surprisingly, it actually gets worse. I'm sure you just had a reaction to that sound. That is predictive processing. Your brain is a learning machine. It's constantly adapting and learning in every environment it's in. The article puts this perfectly, and I quote, "Our brains generate statistical models of the world based on prior learning to provide us with predictions of what will arise in experience and how to act accordingly. In doing so, our brains predict upcoming sensory states and compare them with actual sensory states." To put it simply, our brains process different environments first through past experiences and expectations. This is called the theory of predictive processing. So how does this all tie into social media? Well, due to your brain trying to find predictability and reduce uncertainty, cravings to check social medias in your phone become more and more common. This is called prediction errors. Your brain anticipates that checking your phone will bring some kind of social reward, so it urges you to look at it, even if you didn't get a notification in the first place. Furthermore, like I said before, even if you did get a notification, the intermittent schedules of them or the randomness of them will create stronger anticipations, which basically just leads to more compulsive expectations. The best and most common example of a prediction error is, let's say your phone just made a sound. Your brain instantly goes into, well, maybe it's the person I want to texted me, or I got a like or someone commented under one of my posts. So you look at your phone and it's just a spam email or a text from your boss. This is the best and most common example of a prediction error, and most of the time it will leave you disappointed. This was a big example they used throughout the study to really get this point across. In addition to that, another great example of a prediction error is when you think your phone vibrated in your pocket when it didn't. This is a prime example of a prediction error in a phenomena called the phantom phone, which your brain will literally hallucinate or make up things. These are common examples of prediction errors, and they're actually why most people, pretty much everyone, compulsively checks their phone. And the scariest part is, like I said before, dopamine will actually fall below baseline if your expectations weren't met, which unfortunately most of us can say is most of the time. So in this video, we went into the evolutionary reasons of why phones and social medias are addictive. We didn't really go into any of the stuff that we actually see on social media that makes it addictive, because as outlined in this paper, it's not the root of the problem. But there is something that we see directly on social media a lot that I want to briefly touch on: comparison. We often hear that comparison is the thief of joy. However, this isn't always actually true. Comparison in social monitoring is actually a pretty ordinary part of regular human cognition, and in some ways can actually be healthy and is a part of our evolution. The paper outlined that comparing ourselves actually helps us derive meaning, purpose, motivation, and gives us a sense of identity. And it helps you gauge yourself among your social circle. It actually fosters healthy competition, which humans innately have. This is why we've seen so much progression and innovation in the past 100 years, let's say. You look around and look at, let's say, technology specifically, and you look at it 100 years ago, they're nowhere close. This is in part due to healthy competition among humans. However, as we can all guess, it becomes really bad on social media. To put it simply, our brains are not equipped to handle that much information. The average person is on their phone for 3 hours a day and taps, types, swipes 2,617 times on average every day. And I'm sure you guys got that point, but to put it in a bit more of a perspective, you're seeing people's opinions and inside look into their lives, their achievements, over 2,000 times every day. If you span that out over a year, that's over 955,000 times every year. And myself and pretty much everyone else I know has been doing this for over a decade. So when you really think about it, no wonder we have skyrocketing mental health issues. This evolutionary process of comparison is on relentless overdrive. And overdrive is probably an understatement. Realistically, most of everything we see on social media are just the good parts of people's lives. And when you're constantly looking at this, it creates a negative self-evaluation. Like I said before, comparison is actually healthy to gauge yourself among your circle of peers. And when your circle of peers is pretty much the story reel of everyone's lives, that's going to result in a super negative evaluation and just make you feel terrible about yourself. So for the big question of this video, how do we fix this? When it comes to undoing phone addiction, there's realistically only two ways. The classical treatment approach, which is just abstinence, or a harm reduction approach. The paper, and myself included, are not a fan of the classical treatment of just straight abstinence. And there's a simple reason for this. We live in a digital age now, no matter which way you put it. And there are simply social consequences for completely throwing your phone out the window. We live in an age of instant communication and hypersociality. So if you were just to throw your phone out the window, you're gonna be constantly fighting an uphill battle. Everything we do, such as getting jobs like LinkedIn, or obviously communication with all the social medias, or even just something as simple as getting directions or simple things like that, make it almost impossible to completely be abstinent from your phone. So a better way of doing this is through a harm reduction approach. The approach they use in this paper is called setting intentional protocol. This is a simple 3-step process that might be very obvious to a lot of you, but now that we know how our brain actually works and how these things will actually help, it'll start to make a lot more sense and do a lot more justice in your life. Step 1, regain control of the pattern and make things predictable again. Editing Grady here. I forgot to say what it is. Put your phone on silent, do not disturb, or leave it out of your room. I forgot to say it. I don't know why. Back to the video. As we learned before, the sounds your phones make, or cues, cause dopaminergic surges that make you want to check your phone. And if you don't check your phone, it just provokes anxiety. This will get rid of prediction errors and all around really help with the temptation. The paper called this unringing Pavlov's bell. And make a habit of this. Your brain is simply not going to change overnight. It's not like the cravings are going to go away at the snap of a finger. But the good news is your brain will change over time. Step 2, setting and planning regular interval schedules to check your phone. This works because it gets rid of the intermittent schedules. If you have a plan or set time every day as to when you check your phone, this will get rid of this huge addictive piece of excessive phone consumption. And we have to remember that these cravings come from the chaotic, unpredictable patterns of reward anticipation. Step 3, make your intentions transparent with others. Like I said before, humans are super pro-social creatures and always want to be in the loop. So for example, telling your friends, your family, your coworkers, etc., that you're only checking and replying to messages at certain times every day, or that you're only checking emails during weekdays, this has shown to significantly reduce stress and also boost productivity, which is a great plus. Moral of the story, this whole protocol is about being intentional. I actually have a great video about this coming out where I go specifically in depth into these 3 steps. We look at the science, the neuroscience, the anthropology behind it, and I give you guys really useful real world advice about how to implement this and then how to scale it up as time goes on. So be on the lookout for that if you enjoyed this video. So all in all, I know that was a huge information overload, but if you guys want to read this article for yourself and go more in depth and even look into more studies around it, which are linked in the article, go ahead and read it. It'll be in the description. I found it fascinating. The paper was amazing. And let's be honest, they definitely did describe these ideas better than I did in this video. So if you guys like this video, stay on the lookout because that's what this channel is all about. Consumption to creativity, turning our social media addictions into a creative thing that we love creating. So if you guys did enjoy the video, like, subscribe, yada, yada, yada. You've all heard it 1 million times before, so just consider it if you did like this video and want to see more, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.